A provocative new book that's out posits that Christian evangelicals have lost their way when it comes to politics. Jonathan Rauch, a self-proclaimed Jewish, gay, atheist writer, writes that a church of fear has arisen. His new book, is called Cross Purposes: Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy.
Rauch goes on to write that militant Christian nationalists have moved away from the teachings of Jesus, and instead they embrace the notion of, quote, winning in politics and winning in the culture wars.
Here to offer his somewhat existential argument and expand on why he believes today's version of Christianity is very much a church of fear is Jonathan Rauch. Welcome to Rising.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so great to have you. Congrats on the new book. Why don't you, give us the 30 or 40-second pitch for what it is about and why you think Christianity has gone astray in terms of its political advocacy?
The one-sentence summary is that America is becoming ungovernable in significant part because Christianity is a load-bearing wall in our democracy, and it's failing. But the solution is not less Christianity, it's more Christianity. It's returning to the teachings of Jesus, which turn out to be a lot of what our country needs to do politics better and heal right now.
So what are some tangible examples you have of the way that you think Christianity, and I assume how it is used throughout the Republican Party, is harming our country, harming our democracy?
Well, I should say that I'm not a Christian myself. I don't pretend to be. I rely on the work and thinking of a lot of people who are Christians who are terribly concerned about what's happened. So a lot of people don't know this, Robbie, but you remember that famous quote that Donald Trump said about, he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his supporters were so loyal that they'd keep supporting him?
I quite remember.
He said that at Dordt University, which is an evangelical college in Iowa. And it's the same speech where he says, if you elect me, you will have power. Remember that. A constant theme of his. And that's been the trade-off that white evangelicals have made. They get power, and in exchange, he gets their unconditional loyalty. So the problem with that is right in Matthew 4:10, Satan takes Jesus up to the mountaintop, shows him the whole of the world, says, you can have all of this if you'll bow down and worship me. And of course, Jesus turns that down. Christianity does not do what it needs to do for our country's spiritual health and its emotional health, and for that matter, really its mental health, if it's chasing power instead of teaching the gospel.
Jonathan, to I suppose, declare an interest of a kind. I am not a religious person. I'm not a believer in any organized religion. I guess I have some somewhat woo-woo spiritual beliefs, but not a believer in Christianity or any other major religion. And so when you talk about the solution being not less Christianity but more Christianity, I have an automatic sort of secularist flinch away from that, because I don't really understand what the argument for more Christianity is. If it is that Christianity has a moral code, well, okay, but I mean, different Christians interpret that moral code in vastly different ways. And, you know, going back to the debates that emerged when Christopher Hitchens wrote God is Not Great, there's real debate about whether morality emanates from religion or exists separate from it. I certainly don't think atheists like you or I are morally inferior in any way. So given all of that, what exactly is the argument for more Christianity?
Well, thank you. To answer that question, we have to look at the specific teachings of Jesus Christ, which is what I, as an outsider, try to do in this book. Christians say if you had to define the teachings of Jesus, standing as it were on one foot, it would be three things. The first is don't be afraid, the most frequently repeated injunction in the Christian Bible. The second is imitate Jesus, strive to be like him. And the third is forgive each other. Those are the core teachings. Some people add repentance, but those are the big three. Those translate very well from a secular point of view into core doctrines that the founders relied on to make the country work. Be not afraid is Sometimes you lose an election. It's not the end of the world. You'll come back. You can learn from that. Don't lie about it. Don't try to steal the election. Have some confidence in this system. Be like Jesus says. Make sure and protect your minorities and minority rights, and never use people as means to an end. They're always ends in themselves. So treat fellow citizens with dignity and care even when you disagree. And third, forgive each other. That translates into sometimes you win an election, you're not out to crush the other side and rid the country of them and salt the soil with the tears of their women. You're going to share the country. You're going to remember and respect that they're your fellow citizens, and you're going to treat them the way you want to be treated when they're in power. The founder said those are core Republican virtues, and you have to have those or the Constitution will not work, and they were right. And those are the values that are intrinsic in the core teachings of Christianity.
And there's, so I agree with a lot of what you just said. I mean, I similarly am not a particularly religious person, although I was raised in a Catholic educational environment and have some affection for Catholic tradition. Where I think I disagree with you is on your earlier statement about power. Obviously, the pursuit of just, raw power for power's sake, I think one could easily make an argument is not a particularly positive religious goal or even just a good goal in general. It's kind of a supervillain ethos. But religious people, I think on the right would say, well, we've sought power through Trump, yes, this political alliance with Trump, in order to get tangible political goals that pertain to our religion, like restrictions on abortion or like more ironclad separation of gender-based policy in the legal system, things that conservative religious people have wanted for a long time are getting through Trump. Is that was it wrong for them to seek power in order to succeed in that project?
Well, a couple of things about that. The first is that the actual teaching of the gospel is pretty clear on this. Jesus says explicitly, separate the things of God from the things of power and focus on the next world. That's the Christian's role in life. So the religion itself has important doctrines on this, and one mustn't lose sight of that. But second, fundamentally, Robbie, of course people of faith should participate in politics, and of course they should bring their whole selves to politics. No one's disputing that. It's a question of the how of politics, not the what, as the pastor Curtis Chang has put it. Do you address your fellow citizens in the spirit of those three principles that we just talked about, without fear and with civility, and in a spirit of toleration and forgiveness? Or, for example, do you address entire groups of people as vermin? Just for one example. It's the style of the address, the style of the participation in politics that's doing so much damage right now.
But just briefly, Jonathan, because we're almost out of time, I mean, I guess where I would push back a little is, I mean, those virtues that you talk about, those aren't exclusive to Christianity, for a start. Things like civility and treating people with forgiveness or with compassion. But also, I mean, to use a now deceased example, Jerry Falwell's vision of Christianity would be very different from the one that you have just put forth. So,
indeed, it would.
I mean, that seems to cut against the argument to some extent, no?
Well, of course, many people claim to be Christians, and but I think it's fair to say that the principles that we've been talking about are deeply embedded in the actual teachings of the gospel. The main takeaway of my book, Niall, is I'm not saying for a minute that you have to be Christian to be a good citizen or a moral person or to support the country. I'm not a Christian. I'm an outsider on three dimensions. But it is important that our country's founding faith, that's white Protestantism, be aligned enough with the core values of our Constitution so that they're not at war with each other. And the Church of Fear is pulling directly against those principles of liberal democracy that our Constitution relies on. And so all I'm pleading with is I'm not asking Christians to be more secular or democratic or Republican or liberal or conservative. I'm just saying if Christians were a bit more Christian, if they were following the teachings of their own gospel, it could do a lot to heal our politics, and actually it might also help heal the church.
Jonathan Rauch, thank you so much for joining us to discuss your new book. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, President Trump taps a surprising person to help lead the nation's law enforcement agency, the FBI. Find out more next.